I will make a few comments at the end about the Financial Health Task Force. There isn't actually a full presentation for that yet, but I will give you an update as to where we are. So we have all of you here in the assembly room. We also have Zoom running. So there are people online, and Marcy is up in the balcony. She is checking on the chat. She's hiding behind the wreath and the garlands. And so there will be 3 separate presentations. We're going to ask that you hold your questions until the end so that we can get through all of the content, and then we can cycle back to questions at the end of the presentations. And you will find on your table 3 different colored pieces of paper. There are opportunities there for you to make notes. And are there questions on there as well?
Yes.
Okay, and there are questions on the papers as well. If you want to provide us with some feedback, that would be very useful. So this is scheduled for an hour. The presentations, I think, are going to take around 35 minutes, 40 minutes maybe, and then we should have about 20, 25 minutes at the end for questions. So I think I'm now going to swap seats with Catherine, and we're going to move into governance.
Okay. So we're going to share screen here. Fine. Let's do that. Okay. I think the advanced one, Sarah. One or two. One moment. Thanks, everybody. I'm Catherine Spinella. I'm here on behalf of the Governance Task Force. Also, we have Peggy and Sally, if you guys can wave. This is very much a team effort, and we may have others on Zoom from our task force, but I just want to thank all members of the task force because this is definitely a team effort. Okay. This doesn't look quite right, but I mean, go next. I'm going to talk you through this. So we have a lot of material to cover, and I'm going to jump right in. Since our last presentation in September, we have further honed our vision of a governing board. In terms of its responsibilities, we envision the board making its most important contributions to the mission of the church in 3 ways: by being a good partner to clergy, by hosting an ongoing conversation about the future and missional priorities of the church, and by creating a sound structure of policy that serves to regulate decision-making. We expect to propose a board of 8 members with 4 officers and 4 at-large members. Clergy and the executive director would be ex officio members of the governing board with voice but no vote. We also want to continue the youth presence and representation that we initiated about 4 or 5 years ago, and we are proposing an ex officio youth position for a junior or senior in high school. We envision a number of standing committees appointed by the governing board to advise the board as needed on fiduciary matters like finance and investment, building care, leadership discernment, personnel. As advisory committees, standing committees would exist to help the board govern and not for administration or program management or to make decisions on the board's behalf. Our current thinking is that stewardship would also be a standing committee of the governing board. As it does now, the governing board would also appoint task forces to investigate special topics and key issues. Okay. This one looks a little better. Okay, as we said in September, ministries and ministry teams represent the power of the church. They do the work of the church. Well, yes, but I have an illustrious, I will definitely slow down. Sure. Yes. So the ministry teams are the power of the church. They do the work of the church in alignment with Union's statement of purpose and annual mission priorities. And we envision that those annual mission priorities would be voted on by the congregation. Over the course of the fall, we have further defined our definition and vision of ministry and ministry teams. So while all ministry teams are accountable to the mission of the church, the statement of purpose, oversight for ministry teams would reside with clergy. Ministry teams would engage volunteers in the mission of the church. Fewer meetings, more focused volunteer opportunities are intended to make better use of volunteers' time. Members and friends would be called to volunteer where their interests and passions lie. As a result, ministry team coordinators and ministry team members would not be voted on by the congregation. So how would folks find their way to ministry teams? We expect to offer pathways for church members and friends to discern their personal spiritual gifts. And over the summer and then periodically thereafter, we expect to invite signups for both fresh and familiar types of service. Everything from greeting on Sundays to designing banners to supporting faith formation and creation justice to planning and showing up for outreach projects. There will also be opportunities to be part of operational planning and coordination to make our goals and mission priorities a reality. Rather than recruiting for ministry team members or coordinators, nominating anticipates facilitating periodic sessions where all of us can learn about the many opportunities that we have at Union, suggest new ideas, and sign up for roles that bring joy to us. So we are still in the process of grouping and naming main ministry areas, but the 4 boxes at the bottom, not yet, 4 boxes at the bottom reflect potential ministry categories. Worship, and we're even thinking about broadening that to everything that happens on Sunday morning. Faith formation, congregational engagement and care, and justice and community engagement. So I want to point out that the definition of these categories we expect will change over time as we learn through experience. To keep things flexible and reduce bureaucracy, the bylaws are not going to hard code the ministry teams, their functions, or define them. We really want a much more flexible structure. That's one of the goals of this process. And certainly we are anticipating in the first year of implementation that we're going to learn a lot, and we will probably revise and tweak things in terms of ministry teams at the end of the year. Okay.
Yeah, she's moving.
So, a lot to absorb here, and I'm going to just call out some highlights. We know that clarity around roles and responsibilities and accountability creates confusion, and it muddles and slows our decision-making process. So a lot of our work this fall has focused on clarifying and defining decision-making authority and accountability for all parties. So first and foremost, everyone, all parties here, are accountable to Union's mission, which is our statement of purpose, and the annual mission priorities that we think are going to be a key element of our new structure. So let's start with the congregation. In terms of authority and decision-making, the congregation has and will continue to have broad decision-making authority for our budget, our monies, for electing our governing board, for approving major initiatives and expenditures, for calling clergy, and for the purchase and sale of any property. In addition, we are proposing to expand that authority to include an explicit process to provide for the congregation to provide input into annual mission priorities, and then also to vote to approve those priorities. So the governing board then, moving on, as we've said, would focus on creating and monitoring mission priorities as well as establishing governing policies. They oversee clergy, they hire and oversee the executive director, they appoint and oversee standing committees and task forces. Next is clergy. So clergy are called by the congregation. They report to the governing board, supervise program staff, which is music and education, oversee ministry teams, plan and execute worship, pastoral care, and programs of the church. They help to develop and propose annual mission goals and priorities. The executive director is hired by and reports to the governing board, supervises administrative staff, and focuses on institutional and financial fiduciary responsibilities. So the executive director works with the treasurer to develop budget proposals in line with the mission goals, and in collaboration with the governing board, oversees fiduciary standing committees. Ministry teams, as we've said, execute mission goals and are the power of the church. They report to and collaborate with clergy and staff. And lastly, standing committees report to the governing board and the executive director. They bring research and policy recommendations to the governing board in an advisory capacity. So while we have tried to nail down a number and kind of give some definition, further definition to this process, there's still a number of areas that we are working on and looking to define further. These include officer roles and responsibilities, succession planning, terms and term limits, exactly the mechanics of how we transition to a new structure, definition around those ministry focus areas, and further defining that authority and accountability chart that we just went through. So the last piece of this that I'm going to talk about is the timeline. At the end of January, we are planning to come back to you in a congregational meeting at the annual meeting with a proposal for Union's governance structure for your consideration. It'll encompass the roles, the responsibilities, decision-making authority, and accountability for all of the parties. This is going to be a prose document and presentation with charts and diagrams, not a set of bylaw changes. So there'll be some time after that annual meeting for you to comment and provide input, and then we'll revise the proposal based on those suggestions as needed. And our plan would be to return to the congregation in a special congregational meeting at the end of February to affirm and approve the new governance structure, probably in the form of a resolution or something like that. Then with that approval, work on the bylaws revisions would begin in March and take place over a couple of months. At the end of May, beginning part of June, we would present those bylaws again for review, consideration, comment. And the goal then would be to approve new bylaws in June, along with a slate for the first governing board under the new structure. So that's the timeline. In other words, we will, we're busy, we're working along. That's the report that I wanted to give. I'm going to turn it over, but I might suggest I'm not sure which color-coded sheet is governance, but if you have questions, the green one, and you want to just jot those down now, it may be a while before we get to the question section. So if you have thoughts, I'd jot them down now. Thanks a lot.
Boy, they're really doing a big job, aren't they?
Worship space. I want to hear.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Chase. I'm the head of the Worship Space Task Force, and my task is to kind of bring you up to date on what's happened since the last presentation, which we made, which was on October 2nd. So I'll give you a little bit of background and then bring you up to date and point you a little bit towards the future of what will be happening over the next several weeks. There are several members of the task force. In fact, all the members of the task force are here. Barbara Marin, Sarah, Karen Davio, I saw her. Now I don't say, there she is in the back. And John David Whitener is leading the choir right now. So he's also on the task force. So let me just give you a little bit of background to bring you up to speed as to where we were in October. We began with a challenge. The task force membership had widely divergent viewpoints about what we should do in terms of reimagining our sanctuary, to the point where we were questioning whether or not we would even be able to accomplish our task. As I mentioned in October, at subsequent gatherings, we shared views without fear of judgment. We built trust. We achieved consensus on a variety of matters, and we had some fun. So, and today I hope you will see that we have been able to achieve some rather impressive things over the last several months. So our first task, as I mentioned in October, was to find an architectural partner, and we have spent most of our work around this part of our task. We researched dozens of architects, visited churches, interviewed clergy and other church leaders who had undertaken recent renovations in their sanctuary. And then we gathered for an introductory conversation with Greg Schweitzer, who is an architect, and he was extremely helpful in trying to help us outline what we needed to have in a programming document, which we created, that categorized both the desired outcomes for our reimagining and the problem areas. So this informal search led us to 11 firms. All these firms, received our programming document. 6 firms responded, and we reviewed their portfolios. We narrowed these down to 4. This is where we were in October, and we held visits of the principals from each of those 4 firms. All 4 expressed appreciation for the diligence with which the task force, thank you task force, had undertaken their work, and enthusiasm for the planning document we had created. Meanwhile, there were other events underway, and Paul will speak to this more in a moment, both in terms of our community here, that is the Montclair community, and in terms of our congregational needs, so that we thought that what we would do would be to integrate the Worship Space Task Force with the Community Outreach Task Force as we continue to do our work, and this we have done. 2 firms withdrew from consideration for various reasons, and 2 remained and submitted their next phase proposals on time, and they were reviewed by the task force. One of these proposals, as Paul later described, was kind of a typical nuts and bolts architectural proposal. It was clear, logical, concise, but we didn't really request that. The document that we were requesting featured more design elements and ideas, and this particular proposal was particularly lacking in some of that imagination that we were looking for, even at the initial stages of this conversation. Final proposal that we considered was from PFAFF, that's P-F-A-F-F, I think it's on the slide, right? Yes, there it is. PFAFF Architects. And as we received their proposal, we discovered that it really prompted a deeper dive, and that deeper dive led us to certain conclusions. PFAFF alone among the firms really honored the process we had created, and we were very clear that we were novices at this, but they really honored that, and at each stage provided the elements that we requested. Became clear that they'd listened to us and afforded us the kind of respect that we felt would be essential in any successful partnership. Their proposal also revealed significant, what we might call creative clues, almost on every page. There was something, there was a kind of revelation like, oh, this makes sense. This is what we're looking for. And that all offered evidence of a symbolic kind of wisdom, insight, and creativity on their part that pointed to a great possibility for partnership. So just a couple of highlights from this. Their proposal was 10, 11 pages, and just a couple of highlights. In a kind of introductory statement, they said this, and I'll quote, churches take an infinite variety of forms. They reflect the nature of a specific time, place, and group of people who have chosen to collectively gather in that structure to create a worship community and find a purposeful, greater meaning together. This just really reflected our strategic envisioning about who we want to be as a congregation. And well, wow, that was an important initial connection. On page 3, they said, and I will quote, this is brief, a welcoming entry begins at the street. Now this, which I personally agree with, but this was something that was echoed by several of the architectural firms that we interviewed or considered. And it speaks to the need to extend an open, hospitable outreach to people even before they get into our church building itself. On page 4, they said that we would use the outdoor space to, quote, rethink and incorporate the various building signage elements to convey identity, historic information, wayfinding, and current program content information. And if you go out on the street now and you notice our building, there are a potpourri of signs and directions, and what they were offering in this very initial idea was to create a kind of comprehensive coordinated signage that would point towards wayfinding into our congregation without having to change the exterior of the building. And of course, that's very important because of our historic place in the town.
Closing the door.
Oh, okay.
And then on page 5, they said we would look to develop a front entry to the worship space that is easy to find and inviting. Again, really important. And I, with all due respect, have to say that where the Christmas tree is so put out there this morning, there is no way to get into the sanctuary. So at least for me, because that's the path I usually take. Anyway, this important principle is something that they would seek to incorporate into their design. Then they began their discussion of ideas inside the sanctuary itself with light and not with space. And that became a kind of an aha framing for the task force, because as we had been starting with space all the time, and we got to then pews and the removal of pews and not the removal of pews, and it became loggerheads too often. And so the idea of starting with light had a whole new idea of how to approach our space for in seeking its worshipful environment. So we thought that was really great. Credit where that is due. That was their initial idea as we think about how to reimagine our sanctuary. And then finally, the concluding page. Montclair is a relevant, culturally diverse, and artistically aware community, a worship space that is flexible in its seating and configuration, lighting system, and sound and acoustics will allow for new possibilities that enhance the church's identity as an integral community space. So their proposal kind of read like a book or a story. And any good book, any good story has at its end the concluding kind of point of the story. And of course, this is what we have been talking about for weeks and months here about making Union a community hub for Montclair. So we thought that was really on target in terms of what we were thinking. There were just a couple of additional items that I think impacted the task force. I wanted to share those with you aside from the proposal. And the first is that there was a strong consensus, and we have everybody except John David, or everyone on the task force is present here, so they can confirm or shoot me down or throw things at me if they deny this. But everybody seemed to think that of all the architectural firms that we engaged in the visits, this was the one we felt most comfortable with. We felt interpersonally that seemed to be really, really important. And one of the two most important things we talked about in terms of looking for an architectural firm was interpersonal compatibility and the capacity to do the work that they say they can do. So that first one, Pfaff, by far was the one we felt most compatible with. So that was something that we wanted to acknowledge. The other thing is that other firms that we talked with had more experience with sacred spaces, but in most cases, those sacred spaces were different than our sacred space. They were more formal, they were more infused with religious iconography. They were Coptic Orthodox, Reformed Judaism, Roman Catholic, and Bill Pfaff and Gretchen Reinheimer, the principals of this firm, have background and experience in Protestant worship services, more akin to the theological and cultural ethos of Union Church. And as I said earlier, they seem to really listen to us and kind of get us. And then coming full circle back to Greg Schweitzer's initial conversation with us, his strong counsel was to go with a small firm so that we would have direct contact with the principals of the firm. And while we met with the principals of all four firms, two of which were very large firms, we felt that this was really an important comment that Greg had made to us that we wanted to kind of honor. And so Pfaff stood out in that regard too. So we have informed them that we are interested in being in partnership with them. And there are certain caveats that we enumerated in terms of presenting to us budget parameters and funding structures, and a couple of other things, acknowledging that it's a broader scope of work, a longer timeline, that kind of thing. But those are all underway, and if those, as the Presbyterians say, if the way be clear, we will continue to work with Pfaff as we move into this future. And I think with that, I will turn to Paul, who will share more about. Let me just say one other thing is that we will. There will be an opportunity for the congregation to engage more directly with Pfaff, with Bill and Gretchen shortly after the first of the year. So this is not all, and you will have an opportunity both to communicate with them in terms of finances, timeline, and different elements that would be in their design. Okay, Paul? Yeah, I'll go behind you.
So, good morning, I'm Paul Sionis, and I'm the chair of the Campus Outreach Task Force. And our members include Suzanne Tuck, who is sitting here in the audience, and then Jeannie Temler, Beth Shepard, and Liz Kaplan are all in choir practice right now. Next slide, please. So Bob just explained the steps that the worship committee has taken so far. And we determined that there will be overlap between the campus outreach task force and the worship task force, especially in that it will be logical for the architecture firm to be asked to look at more than just the sanctuary. In particular, the rest of this building. So looking at accessibility, and people have asked, what do I mean by accessibility? So that refers, the politically correct way to say it is barrier-free accessibility, which is really handicapped access. You know, people who are less able than others to be able to get to the second floor, to get to other parts of this building. So it makes sense for the architects to look at this building for accessibility, for storage. You know, what do we do with these tables and chairs? If we do something with the pews in the future, where are the chairs in there stored? And also possible spaces to generate income. Next slide. We also might ask them to look at the entire campus, not just this building, not just the sanctuary. So the ideas, lots of ideas have been floated. One of the ideas has been to move the church offices and the staff into this main building. It might be logical to have everything to do with church in this building. It would breathe new life into this building, but also it could free up future rentable space in the Vincent building. Also, Tim Chris showed us an image he found in the church archives from the early 1920s, and it was a drawing of the sanctuary with the minister's office just to the north of where the organ is now. You know, later on, the minister had a study in the tower, but it makes sense to get it into this building. Next slide. So as part of our work, we invited 4 groups in that we identified in our earlier research over the last year. And we invited them in to discuss how Union could help them, and in turn, how they could assist Union both missionally and financially. Next slide. Oh, back one, sorry. So let's start with HomeCore. So we met with the president of the board of HomeCore back on November 22nd. So HomeCore, since the late 1980s, has been Montclair's major affordable housing agency. So we discussed if it made financial sense to develop affordable housing or affordable dwelling units at the 2 parsonages and the empty lot next to Parsonage 2. So HomeCore's board president, Roosevelt Neesmith, explained the various state funding and grants that are available for projects like this. We didn't know that there was grant money and funding available, so this would not be necessarily out of the church's pocket. He then explained to us how they worked with the Presbyterian Church of Upper Montclair, just a few blocks north of here. So the Presbyterian Church had an empty parsonage they no longer used. So working with HomeCore, they turned that parsonage into one affordable rent-generating dwelling unit. The next group we met with were the seniors. So that's we met with Montclair Gateway to Aging in Place Director Ann Lapel and Montclair's senior coordinator Michelle DeWitt. So Jeannie, Katrina, and John met with them. So the group enthusiastically toured our facilities, and they discussed part-time usage of some of our spaces, especially the assembly room, the kitchen, and the guild room. We agreed to discuss with them in January. They said that the town provides space at Edgemont Park Shelter Building now, but they said it was definitely inadequate for their needs. We then met with Family Promise. We met with Director Tia Avery on November 29th. She's the CEO of Family Promise. So Family Promise most recently has been working side by side with HomeCore to provide housing for some of Family Promise's clients in Montclair. They currently use space at Central Presbyterian Church in Montclair, but it's not enough. It's inadequate space. TIA said they require space for 12 staff, a meeting room, lunchroom, training room, classroom space, and storage space. She even asked about the idea of providing temporary bridge housing in a parsonage in the future for them. And then the fourth group we met with was Church World Service. We had a Zoom call with Courtney Madsen several months ago of Church World Service office in Jersey City. So we again participated in a Zoom call with her about a week ago. Courtney said they currently have a staff of 50, which is constantly growing. They're looking for faith-based community partners so that they could place staff in townships in Bergen County and Essex County, providing them with office space and the ability to occasionally meet with their clients. She made it clear to us that Church World Service could fill whatever space we have, whatever space we could provide them. They have funds available and they could pay market rate rents. They also have staff that manages housing, including temporary refugee housing, if we were to go in that direction. Next. So we discussed some of the spaces that are available on our campus that could be available to missionally aligned users. We're seeing how some of these groups could fit in without renovations, especially without major renovations. So the first thing is the East Wing, just behind you. We think it's underutilized during the week. It has a lot of potential. The number of hours those rooms are used is pretty small during the week. Next slide. If you haven't been to the second floor, you have the second floor of the East Room where sometimes we have classrooms or meetings. That's the slide on the left, the picture on the left. And then the music room has not been used during the week as often as it could be. Next slide. That's not my next slide. That's not my next slide. Oh boy. Okay. Well, then we've got the first floor. There are two childcare rooms back on the east side of this East Wing. They're underutilized. They could certainly generate income and be used during the week.
You keep talking.
Okay.
Catch up.
Okay. And we've got this assembly room, not used too much during the week. The seniors' eyes lit up when they saw this, as I said, when they saw this, the kitchen and the guild room. They would only need to use this on a part-time basis, 2 or 3 mornings a week for meetings or activities. The second floor of the assembly room right up there to the south, it's great space up there. It's not utilized that often. It's occasionally been used for childcare or Sunday school classes, but for the most part, it's not used. It's well lit. It's on the south side of the building. Okay. So that's the first floor in the East Wing. This is the assembly room you're sitting in. This is the guild room and the kitchen, which the seniors, like I said, they were so enthusiastic to see those two spaces, especially to see a commercial kitchen. Next slide. And then there's the Vinson Building. The future of the nursery school and the use of the entire Vinson Building is an unknown at this time due to the township offering free nursery school spots. So the nursery school and the church are continuing to monitor that. Next slide. So the next steps for our group is to appear to be the preparation of an expanded survey to the congregation. We have one survey that's on the tables now. This is just a small series of questions. If you could fill it out and leave it with us. But there'll be an expanded questionnaire, hopefully in time for the annual meeting. And then we'll be looking for the preparation of a master plan once the architects are on board. So the master plan and our steps could study various possibilities, such as moving the church offices, which means the staff and the associated spaces to this main building. They could look at making this building barrier-free or handicapped accessible on at least 2 of the floors. They could look at creating leasable spaces to generate income. They could look at alternative residential uses of the 2 parsonages plus the empty lot. And then they could study all the possibilities with the Vinson Building. And those possibilities include keeping the nursery school intact as it is. They could look at a reduced size nursery school, and they could also study no nursery school as another option. At our presentation in October, we stated that performing arts was one of the things the Art Task Force looked at. So Katrina, Liz Kaplan, Beth Shepard, and John Thompson, and John David are following up on the performing arts aspect of our studies. The main thing is that each of the 4 groups we met with and spoke to were so enthusiastic about our facilities. It was contagious, and especially the fact that they would generate rental income and align with our missional component.
We're doing that?
That's it?
Are we doing that?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And just need the next slide.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Is that it? How many slides?
That's it.
Is that it?
That's it. Just one. Good. Okay. So if anyone is not wondering how we're going to pay for this, please see me and give me the answer. Financial health is not just about this visioning process. It was really perhaps, I think, initiated by it in terms of realizing that we continue to have similar conversations at our annual meetings about budgets, and we don't have any principles for what defines financial health for us as a community. So I am leading a group with Bob Kent, Armin Kachaturian, Megan Pearson, Reverend Katrina, Reverend Ron, and John Thompson, as well as Don Hill, our consultant, to try to develop some of those principles. So this is not to necessarily find solutions, but to provide direction. We're not going to be explaining how we should be raising revenues or dealing with expenses specifically, but rather how we should be thinking about our financial health. And it's hard. The first meetings, if you remember the initial strategic visioning meetings, we get excited about some of these ideas, and very quickly we start to wonder how. And I think that's a similar exercise for us. We started by digging into the actual numbers, and you very quickly get lost in the numbers. And so we've reoriented, and we're hoping to meet again this week to start defining some of those principles. And to give you an idea, things like, what should the endowment be, as an example? What size should the endowment be in order to support our community? How much should our contributions from our members cover our expenses? How much money should the campus and all of the buildings contribute to the budget, etc.? So that as we start thinking about budgeting in the future, as we start thinking about our activities, they should be primarily missional driven, but they should also have some principles underlying them around, and what will this contribute financially to the community. And I think that will help just realign some of the conversations. I think it'll make it easier for people who are trying to do the budgeting to at least have something to look back on. At the moment, we really just have the 5% principle in terms of what we're allowed to take from the endowment, but there's really no other guideline. So that's our goal for this, and we hope to be able to provide an update in January. So we have about 15 minutes, and we are now going to move into questions. Is there another microphone that we're going to pass around, or should we use this one?
So the way we're going to do questions is we've got questions in person, and we'll alternate with questions on Zoom if there happen to be. If you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and then you're going to have to repeat the question anyway for the folks on Zoom.
Perfect.
Does anybody have a question?
Should I stand up?
Just go.
Anyway, two quick questions. One concerning the governance, and the other the worship space. Catherine, could you go through again? I know that the standing committees, that has not been fixed, but could you just go through the list again of where we are with that? You mentioned a couple of them as likely to become standing committees.
So for those of you on Zoom, the first question is about standing committees and governance.
Okay. So standing committees, would be advisory committees to the governing board. So that would be committees like building care, building and grounds, finance, what is now the investment advisory committee. And I would just emphasize that as advisory committees, they wouldn't something like personnel, for example. It could be that if there was a question about personnel policies in the environment, they might convene a group that has knowledge of that in the external environment to do some research on behalf of the board and report to the board. I don't know, is that answering your question, Rob?
Yeah, so sort of 3 at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is not to have a proliferation of committees.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Second question, if I might slip a second one in here. Has the architecture firm that you all have engaged presented a tentative plan for the sanctuary? I mean, an actual.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, the second question is, has the architectural firm presented a tentative plan for the sanctuary? And
Something that would be like a visual image or something?
no, but that's coming. In the original report, we asked for ideas and kind of, I used the phrase earlier, creative clues. And I think that's what we were looking for. And what we appreciated so much about the proposal that we got was that that's pretty much what we got. We got clues about how they would do it. In terms of the sanctuary itself, I've had a subsequent addendum to that proposal from Bill Pfaff, and that opens it up a little bit. And but I didn't think that it was proper to share that at this time because it wasn't part of the original report that we got from them. We were explicit. One of the caveats we gave to them was that they needed to develop a more detailed design for the sanctuary, especially for the chancel area of the sanctuary particularly. And basically, just to summarize in 1 or 2 words, their updated proposal was to open up the sanctuary, open up the chancel area, if that makes sense, to make it more closer to the congregation, more usable for musicians, and to take away some of the rigidity that the current architectural design of the sanctuary seems to offer in inhibiting presentations from especially musical presentations from the chancel area. So
Pretty conceptual.
yes, at this point, and that's really what we asked for, because we've got all kinds of things to now explore in terms of dollars and timelines and that kind of thing. But we didn't want that yet. What we wanted was pretty much what they gave us, and then they did update that with some other ideas, which are specifically on opening up the chancel area.
Thank you.
Marcy, any questions on Zoom? So we're gonna move on. So feel free to ask Marcy. You can either just say it out loud or you can put it in the chat and Marcy will ask the question on your behalf.
I'm really curious as to the information you're sharing. My viewpoint is a lot of, and most of what you presented to us should have been presented to us via email, so we have an opportunity to review. Like you, Bob, we're going page by page by page. That would give us an opportunity as the congregation to formulate questions, so we don't have to sit here for an hour listening to you go over things that we should know before we even come here. Just like a corporation, you don't go to a board, people don't attend a board meeting to find out information. They come to the board meeting with the information, so that enables them to ask the appropriate questions that they feel are responsible. And so I'm a little bit disappointed because we're sort of being asked to like come up with questions, and we have no time to process. when it could easily have been
You
sent
better
out
summarize
by
that just
email to all.
So for those of you on Zoom, the question is, or a statement from Scott is just disappointment that we didn't get the information out in advance to give people time to react. And Scott, yes, in a perfect world, absolutely. We try to get information out to people in a timely manner. It's really hard. This came together quite late in the process because there were a lot of last minute revisions, and it's an awful lot of work. These committees have put in huge amounts of time to get us to this point, and sometimes getting to the summary of it in a 40-minute presentation just takes coordination and help from other people. So yes, we absolutely strive to get information out in advance, and we will share this information with you following this presentation.
I'm saying the information that you folks received from the architects, the one that you settled on, all of those 11 pages, why couldn't they have been sent out by email? It would take a ton of time to do that. You just run it through the scanner, shoot it out to the congregation, then we can read what the architect is suggesting.
Can you summarize for Zoom?
Yes, so the question was, well, why couldn't we have just sent out, for example, in the case of the architect, this information via email, and then we would have had then you all would have had an opportunity to ask appropriate questions, that kind of thing. I'll say two things very quickly. Number one, that opportunity is coming. It's not yet, it's coming. And if you think of one major change, which we are presenting here, is that the Campus Outreach Task Force and the Worship Space Task Force are working together now. And that's brand new information. The second thing, Scott, that would be a concern is that sometimes when you send out an email like that, the assumption is that it's a done deal. That it's a done deal. And so there's criticism from that side too, that, well, we would have liked to have heard about this a little bit before we saw it printed in an email. So we wanted to avoid that. This is a kind of an interim, it's been a couple of months since we reported to you, so this is kind of an interim update for that. There will be opportunities to look very closely at at least in terms of the architect, and I'm sure that such is true with the other task forces as well.
Yep. Marcy, just real quick. Marcy, anything on Zoom? Okay.
Hi, this is about campus use. You mentioned something about organizations being willing to pay market value rent. How does that affect our tax status?
Thank you, Karen. Does anybody want to address that? Paul?
For example, what the Presbyterian Church is doing is that
Repeat the question.
well, the question is, how would it affect our tax status if an organization pays market rate rents, for example? I'm not sure exactly how it would work with space that Church World Service would use, but for example, what HomeCore told us, what they were doing with the Presbyterian Church of Upper Montclair was that the tenants, the affordable family, pays the rent directly to HomeCore, and then HomeCore keeps a management fee, 10%, for example, and then makes a donation to Presbyterian Church of Upper Montclair, so they don't lose their tax exempt status. I can't answer how it would work with these other groups using our space, but it would have to be something like that. I'm not an accountant, if there's any accountants in here.
Most of those groups are not-for-profit, right?
They're not raising
Right, well, all of these are not-for-profit groups.
So that's.
Any other questions from inside the assembly room? Marcy, any questions from Zoom? Okay.
Very quiet listeners. All right. Well, we will provide all the email addresses that all you fine people on Zoom can also follow up, and you already know who those people are. But we will reiterate that if you do have questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, there'll be, you can reach out to any of the task force members, and they can have that conversation. And this is an ongoing conversation. So
We're going to
there's-
collect the papers.
Yeah, I'm gonna collect the papers, and then do you wanna do a little? All right. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
Just Scott's good point about we need to digest it and not feedback. How do we share feedback if we realize next week that we want that we have ideas for each other like that? What's the
Yeah, so Tanya's asking how can we share feedback. So I did just want to follow up. The intent of this update was to continue the conversation. That's why they made great effort to both have ways of sharing feedback. If something occurred to you on the papers on your table, you can leave them there. This recording of the Zoom will be going out in our weekly email this Thursday, as will the PowerPoint deck, I believe. You can make a comment on loveunionsjourney.com. The com threw me off. And or you can email any of the task force chairs, me, Marcy. So the hope is really to continue the conversation. We didn't want to get to the point where we were presenting information at the annual meeting for the first time. And you know, people have different learning styles. So for some people it's helpful to hear it first, others to write it down. So we have multiple avenues to continue that conversation. I also just wanted to highlight one thing which Paul mentioned. Some of these possible space use groups are interested in using space now. There might be things we can do before we have to think about remodeling rooms, and we very much want to do those things in the interim. The Gateway to Aging in Place is hoping to have a meeting here in January. We hope to be able to accommodate them. So I think that's very exciting that some of these things are already bearing fruit, and we can begin or continue to do these things more deeply as we move towards a more comprehensive plan. So maybe I'll just end us with a quick prayer. Oh, Dick has a question, yeah.
Very quick question. In your presentations, it would have been very helpful, I know you've got some, of indicating where you found new things that you realized after the discussion that affect your thinking. What was brought to you by these outside people? What was new?
So Dick was wanting to hear from any of the presenters, like what was new from the outside groups that they interviewed. Does anyone want to speak to that briefly?
We really didn't find anything new. It's, as I said, our task force started last spring, and one of the things we first looked at were the needs of the community. And we probably, and Suzanne can correct me if I'm wrong, but we probably reached out to 30 to 40 groups in and around Montclair who could align with our mission. And out of those groups, we identified these 4 that seemed to be a good fit for us. I think because of the research, we didn't find out anything new from them. Is that correct? Maybe the newest thing was the fact that we should really tie in the worship task force with our task force, because there's a real overlap. The architect should not just be looking at the sanctuary. It sort of ties into this space and the rest of this building.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, Dick. You know, I think that's a major revelation that we had, that we were too siloed in our thinking. And by expanding to a holistic approach, architecturally, in terms of reimagining, in terms of mission, that opened up all kinds of opportunities for us and sent us in a new direction.
I think that's important. That's something new to us. And change is what's being done. That's very important. Thank you.
And I would just add that certainly one of the learnings I think we've had on governance is how many different governance structures there are, that we are not, that not everyone has our governance structure that we are so familiar with, and that so many other communities of faith, churches, have already made a lot of the changes that we're contemplating. So we've been talking with some UCC churches, we've been in conversation, who made these changes 5 years ago, and it's really helpful to get feedback on the process from them.
All right, will you join me in prayer? Holy One, Creator and Illuminator, we give you thanks for faithful people doing your work, engaging with one another, listening, reflecting, asking good questions. We ask that you would continue to illuminate us with the ways that you set before us. We ask that you would help us continue to reflect your love in this world, and that you would continue to show us new ways of being your light for those around us. In your name we pray. Amen.